If you love historical TV dramas like I do, you might recognize these two homes. Both are featured on Netflix's Anne with an E and Hallmark's The Way Home. This home represented everything Anne ever wanted when she arrived at Green Gables, full of all the hope and possibility of a brighter future. And more recently, it is depicted as the Landry Farm, a place that binds the time-traveling generations of the Landry family. Somehow romance always develops between the residents of these two homes, both for Anne and Gilbert, and later Kat and Elliot. And by digging deep into historical records, I uncovered a real-life romance that blossomed here that is remarkably similar to the fictional stories they have come to represent. The history of this land begins with the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, a Native American tribe that is part of the larger Ojibwe Nation, who moved to this area around 1700 when their northern homeland was ravaged by European disease and later attacked by another native group. Upon arrival here, the Mississaugas thrived with the untouched forests, plentiful wildlife, and naturally growing wild rice. They lived in birch bark wigwams and had a unique form of pictorial writing to record historical, mathematical, and religious knowledge that is still used today. The Mississaugas way of life changed forever following the British defeat in the American Revolution, which pushed British loyalists north, forcing the indigenous people off this land with the Toronto Purchase, a treaty that they did not understand. On December 31st, 1798, Lieutenant Jacob Farrand was granted 200 acres of land where Gilbert and Elliot's stone house now sits. Jacob Farrand enlisted to serve in the King's Army on November 2nd, 1777. He was born in the colonies, but supported continued British rule. But after 8 years of war, when the British forces succumbed to the Americans, loyalists like Jacob Farrand were unable to return to their American homes. He was granted this property by the King of England, but he never occupied the land, instead living the rest of his short life in Cornwall, Ontario, a few hours northeast, where he died at the age of 39. This land was then sold to the Honorable John Elmsley, a Canadian judge who was involved in land granting and whose family owned it for over 30 years before it was purchased by Isaac Linton. According to the book From Paths to Plains by Lillian Goslin, Isaac was born in 1805 in Yorkshire, England, and he emigrated to Canada in 1830. In 1832, Isaac purchased this 80 acres of land for $6 an acre. He built a small frame house and a large barn for his Clydesdale horses. On October 5, 1842, 37-year-old Isaac married 20-year-old Hannah Coltis, who also emigrated from Yorkshire, England. They had 6 children, including Alice, born in 1847, but who died at the tender age of 9, daughter Anne, born in 1851, Harriet, born in 1854, and Mary Elizabeth, born in 1859. Isaac built this stone house in 1862. Here, Isaac and Hannah raised their family while Isaac often made the 2-day trip to Toronto to trade his produce for sugar and flour. Meanwhile, the home we have come to know as Green Gables or the Landry Farmhouse looked a little different when it was a private residence. It was simpler, without the bay window or the L-shaped extension, which certainly added dimension and interest while serving well for filming. Inside, it was as it had likely been for many years, with dated furniture, floral wallpaper and linens, and wood accents throughout. The records for this home date back to 1846, when William Lapham was granted 30 acres of this land. Lapham was born in Somerset, England on August 2, 1798. He married Mary Gatehouse on July 2, 1821. They arrived in Canada in 1834, where they raised their 6 children. In the 1851 Canadian census, we see the Lintons living next door to the Laphams, though neither of the houses we know today were constructed at this time. I was unable to confirm the exact date that this home was constructed, but the land came to be owned by William Scott in 1861 and was likely built during the years that the Scott family owned this land. William Scott was born in Ontario in 1834 to Scottish immigrants. He married Elizabeth Miller in 1861 and they moved to this property. They eventually came to have 8 children. This is a photo of the Scott family reunion many years later, with William likely one of the 2 older men in the center. In the 1871 census, we see the Scott family living here with their young children. We also see a young farmhand, Vincent Ellis, living on the property. When the Scotts relocated to another part of town, Vincent Ellis rented this property with his wife Susan and their children. Vincent is said to have passed away here on March 14, 1892, from pneumonia at the age of 44. 6 months later, William Scott's son, William George, married Minnie Pugh and took ownership of the farm. Like the Lintons, the Scotts raised Clydesdale horses as well as shorthorn cattle. In 1911, William George and his family, which now included 5 sons, moved to Toronto, where William George helped establish the industrial farm at Langstaff, a home for poor and elderly men. He served here until 1917, when he returned to this home, where he lived until 1930, engaging in numerous civic activities within the town. In 1930, during the early days of the Great Depression, Ralph Wellman, his wife Anne, and their 11-year-old son Paul acquired this farm. The Wellmans were Mennonites, a devout group of Christians who are often confused with the Amish, who embrace modern conveniences like electricity and cars, but who are against violence of all kinds. The family worked hard to make a living during the difficult days of the Depression, followed by World War II. Back over at the Linton house, several generations of Lintons have now called this home. Isaac and Hannah lived here together for over 30 years until their deaths, Isaac in 1893 at the age of 88, and Hannah in 1913 at the age of 91. Their son William, born in 1849, married Sarah Puckrin, and they had 9 children, including son Norman, born in 1886. Norman married Eva Holtby on April 25, 1917. Norman took over the operation of this farm, and in 1920, he built the dairy barn and began shipping milk through the railway. Norman and Eva had 5 daughters, including twins who died in infancy. This photo shows 2 of their surviving daughters, Edith and Eileen, in grade school. In the 1931 census, we see the Lintons and the Wellmans living alongside other relatives and farmhands who inhabited some of the other structures on their properties. We notice that Anne Wellman was born in Germany and that the family was unique in their Mennonite beliefs, with most other residents identifying as Methodist. The Lintons' home was valued significantly higher than the Wellmans, and the Linton sisters, seen here in 1933, also enjoyed the latest technology, a radio that the Wellmans did not have. Somewhere between these 2 homes, a young romance blossomed. Paul Wellman became enamored with Eileen Linton. We can only imagine the encounters the love-struck couple may have had. Not unlike young Anne and Gilbert, or Kat and Elliot, or even Kat's parents, Cole and Delilah. What may have started as friendship eventually became deep, heartfelt gazes, hand-holding, or perhaps a stolen kiss. On March 17, 1945, 25-year-old Paul and 24-year-old Eileen were married at her home. She wore a powder blue street-length dress with a matching headpiece and a bouquet of red roses. Her sister Edith, now a married woman herself, played the wedding music, while Sister Mildred wore an orchid-colored ensemble with pink roses. Eileen and Paul eventually welcomed 2 children, a daughter and a son. In 1953, Paul's father Ralph passed away, followed by mother Annie in 1962, at which time Paul, Eileen, and their children came to call this home. Paul and Eileen were married for 60 years, with most, if not all, of their lives lived between these homes. They tended to this land and worked in this barn the same way Cole and Delilah did during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They celebrated birthdays and Christmases together, and from the safety and comfort of these rooms, they watched world events unfold: the lunar landing, the Vietnam War, 9/11. Paul passed away in 2005, followed by Eileen in 2009, leaving behind several grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Perhaps the next time you watch your favorite episodes of Anne with an E or The Way Home, you will remember Paul and Eileen, whose real-life love story now echoes on screen.